Good evening, everyone. We welcome you all today for another lovely session, which is under the series Spirit of Auroville. And for today's session, we have dear Nadaka with us. And to assist and to moderate this session, we have B. So we welcome Nadaka and B for today's lovely session. And we looking forward to hear you.
Thank you so much.
Let's give a big hand.
So this series that we're doing, as Shilpa said, is on the spirit of Auroville. And as a very special example of the spirit of Auroville, we have Nadaka, who many of you may not know came here as a teenager, as a dropout from high school. And I'll tell you a quick story. No, maybe later.
No, do it. The more.
He walked into the Matrimandiya workshop, and there we were trying to build this ramp. If any of you have been to Matrimandiya, you know you have to go up the spiral ramp. That was a huge job to build this thing. It had never been done before, and we had a structural engineer, world-class one, who actually was from Tamil Nadu. And we were trying to figure this thing out. So we had some engineers and some architects. And then when Nadaka walked in, he said, "I can help you." And we said, "Sure." So he started helping us, and we had one problem where we were stuck, because you had to curve and you had to rise at the same time. So there were some mathematical issues there that were way beyond me, who was had nothing to do with architecture or engineering, and the other people, some of the others. So Nadaka said, "Well, why don't you do it like this? If you do it like this, then maybe it'll work." And then we looked at it. That was the solution. So all 22 pieces that make up that ramp, there's some debt to this man. So he will tell you about the music part. You know, he was just fiddling around with his guitar there in the early years, and then he brought it up into a Vedic instrument of world-class style.
You know, so this has been, nothing of this is planned. I liked the idea of sharing in this way. So when B asked me to do that, I thought it was a nice occasion, and I promised myself that I would not give it any thought. And I had had the occasion regularly, actually, to have people come and meet me in Auroville, and people often ask also, musicians come, they ask, who plays music in Auroville, and I end up, for years and years, I've ended up with musicians from all over the world coming, and we have a little chat, and we sit, and we have tea, and I show them my instrument, and then we talk about Auroville and everything. So my thought was that this should go along this line, that there's nothing formal about it, but really just sharing, whichever way it takes us, we'll share a little bit about our Auroville life. And, the journey also, because it's difficult. It's not that I have a very fixed sequential kind of mind. In fact, I'm not all that great at that. I'm a little dyslexic in that way. But when I tell a story about Auroville, it's very difficult for me to tell the story of Auroville or my story without starting a little bit from the beginning. And I think it joins in very well to the artistic aspect, but also just to the theme, which is the spirit of Auroville. So my journey was an interesting one. So I was a very rebellious teenager. I had 4 older brothers, so I had seen a lot of stuff in my family. Well-to-do North American, Canadian family. And so I discovered all sorts of things about spirituality, and at the age of 13 I was reading, we all started out with Lobsang Rampa. We used to joke about this. Lobsang Rampa was these slightly corny books about astral traveling and spirituality, but they were still nice, and I think I read that. I was 12 years old, and I used to sit in school and I would read about the possibility that one could actually, it might be possible to travel out of one's body and reach other levels of consciousness. And I was 11 years old, and I was sitting in class and thinking, oh my God, they have no idea, And of course, it came together with a bit of innocence that you have at that age. But by the time I was about, I think 13 years old, I was very impressed by J. Krishnamurti, and I read his works. And at some point, I ended up at the age of 16. My parents had kind of warned me, because at the age of 13, I said to my mom, "That's it, school over, finished." And you know, it's very strange. People have a hard time to imagine how it is, but when you see children which are really like that and really have a certain aversion to traditional school and traditional settings, as I have seen many times in Auroville and in different families, you sort of understand at an early age. I have a very, very clear memory of my first day of school, but more of the night before. And in those days, they used to send us to primary school. We were like 3 years old or something, but I have a very clear memory of my mom saying, "Tomorrow is your first day of school." And I have that distinct feeling in me of like, no, no. You know, a terrible thing. They're going to send me to that place where, you know, it was already that thought, like our son Keshava says, no boxes and all. It was already very clear in me that this is not going to be a good thing. So maybe I was the one who projected and started off on a wrong foot. But all this to say that by the time I was 13 years old, I said to my parents, "I'm out of here." Like, and then my mom looked at me and she says, "Listen, you're going to have big trouble with your dad, and that's not going to happen that way. And you know that by law in Canada, you cannot leave school before you're 16 years old is the age limit." So I left it at that. So 3 years later, on my birthday, I announced to my parents it was my last year of high school. So, grade 12, and I just had 3 months to go to finish my high school. So I got my dad and my mom together, and of course some of my family were there, and I said, "I'm going to Morocco." So my family looked at me and said, "What do you mean?" Actually, I didn't tell my dad I was going to Morocco. I told him I was going to Europe, because I was a little safer kind of place. And they said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I mean, you told me 16 years old. I'm 16 years old. I'm leaving." So that was the beginning of my journey, and I would say a kind of a spiritual journey too, because I left all alone and then spent some time in Morocco, which was a wonderful experience to be alone. And this was my first experience of the East, you know, somehow, because, you know, these markets, and being a young kid from Canada, having seen only the USA all the time, traveling a lot to the US and Quebec and my comfortable life there, I suddenly saw a whole new world. And I remember like sitting in markets and sitting in busy places and saying, "This is for me, this is where I have to be. I just cannot really go back to something so sterile and simple as a North American life." So I won't make it too long, but I came back from Morocco after 6 months. And my parents had figured that, they said, "Well, let him do it. You know, after all, kids travel at 18 these days and go around, so it should be okay and all. And he'll be okay, and he'll be right back on the path." But I took the road from Morocco to France, and then came back on a flight. And then I was wearing a Moroccan jalaba, these kind of tunics, and I had a Quran in one pocket, a Bible in the other, Upanishads, etc. It was like the only thing that interested me at that point. And I sort of can imagine today, like my parents and, you know, people around me going, "Oh God, this guy is just, we won't be able to cure him." So the story that connects to Auroville is that I was sitting at a very young age. Yes, it's true, it's young. I was sitting in a tavern where there was a lot of university students discussing spiritual things and all sorts of things. And I was sitting there, and that was 74, just turned 1974. And I used to sit there at that place, and I used to hear these university guys speak, and somehow with what I had experienced, I was quite a little arrogant on the edges for sure. And I would look at these guys and they were like 24, 23 years old and would say, what crap, what are you talking about? It doesn't work like that. It's not like this. And, the spirit doesn't work in this way. And all your stuff is all in your head, and stuff. And they would say, whoa. And one day, one guy came to me and he said, listen, I've been watching you speaking to these people. I cannot give you this book, but take note of it. This is for you. And it was The Adventure of Consciousness by Satprem. It was called Sri Aurobindo, or The Adventure of Consciousness. And so here the story goes that a few weeks later, we go to, with some friends of mine, we go to a book fair. And it's an international book fair, and there are pavilions from all over the world, presenting their books, and there's one of India. But India is only represented by some kind of ashram called the Sri Aurobindo Ashram that has a book stand there. And I meet one fellow, and then I see this galaxy. And I still remember at that time, it's how funny it is, looking at that galaxy, and then my friends were looking and said, this is a city they want to build. And he said, well, it looks very inspiring, but at the same time, why would they want to build a city like, that kind of back to the land feeling and all. So I read The Adventure of Consciousness, and I read the life of Sri Aurobindo. And there was a very distinct feeling that's so clear. And my friends and people said, how are you so sure you're going to? I said, I'm going to India, that's it, I'm out of here. Plus India was the ultimate goal, in any case. So I said, in these circles and all that, going to India was like going to the end of the world. It was reaching the ultimate. So I said, okay, I'm going to travel overland like a proper pilgrim, and I'm going to take a boat. I took a ship to France, and then I traveled overland, and I left France. I think I had $110 in my pocket, and by the time I reached Auroville, I had $50. So basically, I just hitchhiked, walked around, took buses, went on the hippie trail, met, whatever, did my travel. But on the way, I only had one book with me. It was The Mother by Sri Aurobindo. And so these were very intense times. And, it's sort of why I'm telling you all this is the intensity of the time and how powerful it was to actually, it was just the beginning of this Auroville story somewhere. And just, it sounds a little extreme, very naive actually when you think about it, but I remember being in France and going to my brother's house who had just moved to France and preparing some flat bread with Canadian wheat that I brought because that was going to be my food for the road. So for the whole road, I was just going to eat this bread and water because of course you had to be an ascetic person, because how could you be a spiritual person if you weren't going to be a very sort of ascetic being, So there I was with my staff. I didn't have a staff, but imaginary one, and I did the road, and I actually ended up in crossing all the countries from Turkey to, where was it after? Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and then to India. And I had a distinct feeling when I reached India, even Pakistan actually, to tell you the truth, not knowing really the story and the history behind it, but I felt completely at home. It was like a revelation for me. It might sound strange to have this feeling, but recognizing something and feeling this is where I belong. Actually, I never belonged to the world that I was before. It was fine for my growing up, but this is my future. And it's funny because there is a certain mention here, I assume, that there's a connection, Amritsar, Golden Temple. So when I reached the Amritsar Golden Temple, I was walking towards the temple, and by that time I only had one little straw bag with a blanket and a couple of things in it, my little wallet with my passport, and I came to the gate of the Golden Temple, and I turned back, And I said to myself, in all innocence, please understand, I was 16 years old, and maybe in some ways I was probably 10 years old in my mind, but I said, I cannot walk into this Hindu temple not knowing the difference, with so many possessions. It's terrible. How can I do that? I have to leave all possessions behind. So I actually walked back and I gave everything that I had, of course not my passport, smart enough still. And I actually, by the time I actually walked into that place, I had one lungi here and one lungi over my shoulders, and that's it. And I had my little pocket with the thing. So I went there and stayed in the Golden Temple for a few days. They allowed me to stay. I was staying there and all that. Had the experience of my first initial experience of India. And it goes on and on, those stories. But I mean, imagine you're coming from the Western world and you've been brought up, something in between Quebec and Miami Beach. And suddenly you're having your teas, and in those days there was not the corridor around the Golden Temple. And so there were like hundreds of tea shops right next to the temple. And you would have a tea. And by that time, I can tell you, I was probably weighing about 50 kilos at the most. I was so thin. And you would have tea, and then you look at the people drinking the tea, and every sip they take, they blow the flies off, because it was like so many flies, So you're like there, and you're like, hey, that's cool. That's a nice way to drink tea. So you take your tea, and then the flies are all around, go, whoops, and then once in a while one drops in and you take it out and you watch the other people around and you're like, so I don't know how to explain this. Now it sounds very strange and funny, but for me, this was way better than what I had already lived before. This was like all the little anecdotes on the way that made me feel that this is a crazy, fantastic country. Made my way, then after that, I'm not going to give you so many details because it's way too long a story. Ended up in Sarnath.
That's great, thank you.
Ended up in Sarnath, that is in Benares, and stayed with the Buddhist monks for some time. And they all wanted me to become that and all this, and I used to spend time with all these monks there at the Sarnath monastery, the monastery outside. But my path was clear. Auroville, not knowing what it was even. And that's also an interesting thing because you had this strange mixture of romanticism and dream world. So people told me, oh yeah, Auroville we heard about. Apparently people, they have towers and people do prayers from the top. It's all mixed, the Muslim world, the Auroville, Hindu world, ashram. And then they said, but if you go there, you have to decide perhaps, somebody on the road said, whether you are more inclined to aspiration or certitude, etc., because you're going to live in a community where you're going to have such places. So it was like, and at night I would only dream about this kind of stuff. So I was on fire, my heart was on fire for coming to this place. Then I ended up in Chennai, and somebody on the way to Chennai in Afghanistan, a British guy which was going the other direction, proper sort of a fellow, told me, one day I picked up a guitar and then I started strumming a tune and things, and he says, oh, you're very talented. And he said, where are you heading to? I said, well, India, of course. And he said, listen, if you go to Madras, you must go to my teacher Rukmini Devi. So Rukmini Devi, I didn't know who it was, but he gave me a letter and he says, please Rukmini, if ever this young boy comes to you, please take care of him, etc. And he loves music and etc. So I landed up in Madras and I came to the Theosophical Society in Madras. And this was a new world to me at that time. This was Adyar, Adyar now, it's like a huge part of Chennai. But in those days, you could hardly find a hotel to eat, or have anything. So it was like this Theosophical Society, and I come there and I come to this fancy garden and all, and there's nobody there at the house, at the theater. So I sit, and in those days, it was very important for me to do my daily meditation, my daily yoga, hatha yoga, etc. So, I said, okay, I will sit under the tree and meditate. And by that time, I can tell you, I was very thin And I was completely illusioned in that way, that actually when I saw beggars on the road and different people that were thinner than me, I said, oh, I have a long way to go, to reach, to attain a sort of freedom, So I really believed that it was kind of like connected, this asceticism. So I'm sitting under the tree, and then I'm having my meditations. Suddenly a car comes, and then Rukmini Devi comes out of the car and says, now what do we have here? And so she invited me to stay in her house, and then she showed me the original old Kalakshetra, and I spent some time also there. And then at some point she looked at me and she says, my God, you are so young and all, why don't you stay with us and learn music, since you seem to have the talent for music, etc. And I looked at her and I said, I cannot. And she said, but what do you mean this is ideal for you? I said, no, because I'm going to Sri Aurobindo, I'm going to Pondicherry. My path is already laid out. And she was a little taken aback, and she said, well, listen, if ever you need anything in this country, consider me as your, patron or whatever, your mentor. And there was a funny thing at that moment, because she said, you will be back, you will not find much there. So this already, I understood that there were like different schools and different thoughts. So to conclude this part of the story, I took the 83A bus, which took 4.5 hours from Madras to Pondicherry. And it was one of these, bus. And then I stopped on Mahatma Gandhi Road in front of the temple. I walk out and I said, that's it, I'm reaching my destiny. I suddenly see a shop that says sweet and tea. So I said to myself, I'm going to have my last tea and my last sweet before the gates open and they say, welcome, my son. So I have my tea and all that, and then I walk slowly to the Sri Aurobindo ashram. I come to the gate and I'm thinking, that's it, look at that, oh my God, this is the Sri Aurobindo ashram. And I really imagined it that, these, even though it's the middle of Pondicherry, I actually imagined that there was this gate and they would open and behind would be rice fields where I would be working, and there would be kibbutz style thing, and there would be the samadhi, and there would be all these things, and people would sing prayers from the minarets to actually get me to work in the morning. I don't know what was in my mind, but anyway. And I come to the ashram gate and I think, yeah, he's going to say, welcome, my son. And I arrive and one guy looks at me and said, but you aren't here? First you go to guest house? What do you want? I said, no, I've come to join you. And look, first you go shower, then you join, huh? So Bengali fellow. You go to guest house and all that. So at that time you could stay in the guest house. They didn't even care about money. So there was this big community guest house. Huh? Paka Shabam, but it was not, at that time there was the, how do you call it, when you share the rooms with like 50 people and all that? Dormitories. So that was my path to come here to Auroville. And it can go on and on like this, but I thought that I should give you a little introduction to that path.
Also the beautiful story that you were standing in the line.
So 17th November, I knew that Sri Aurobindo had passed away, but I didn't know that the mother was gone. I thought that I was going to be like the blessed child to meet the mother. 17th of November, I'm waiting in line, darshan, and I'm thinking, somewhere, there's always that kind of like, there's something of both. There's that deep devotion, but there's always still that North American mind in me saying, my God, these people look sad. These ashramites look really sad. 17th of November is the year after she passed. So she passed on 17th of November, 1973, and I was waiting in line to see her in 17th November, 74. And at some point after waiting, I said, what a sorry bunch. And then one guy looks at me and said, 1 year ago today, she left us. And I'm like, she left where? Where did she go? she left her body and all that. I'm saying that she left her body 1 year ago, and I'm like, you're kidding me. Come on, don't do this to me. No, I'm thinking in my mind, I'm like thinking, oh God. And then, at that time, do you remember how it was? It was very intense also, there was still very much that presence of the mother everywhere. And of course, I came to understand that, well, maybe she didn't even want to see me, I guess, but maybe the other thing was that it was just time for another era. But for the first years of Auroville, I think that those of us who didn't see the mother almost felt like we had really missed out on something to see her physically. And only later did I understand that it was irrelevant in that way. So that is that part of the story, reaching, and then understanding that Auroville and the ashram is a different place altogether. And of course, at that time you would meet some people. I met Alain Grandcola was the first guy I met in the Frenchman in the ashram, and then the Indians, they would all tell you, they would look at you and they would say, Auroville. Like you, guys like you, they belong in Auroville, because the ashramites, they were all very pious, and they were all dressed in white, very neat, very clean, and all that. And then you'd see, not only there were also some Indians, of course, but the Westerners, and then the whole hippie thing, and then the mix. These guys, immediately you would recognize them immediately. The Aurovillians had red feet because of the earth here. So actually the Tamils called them the red feet people, because they would always have red feet wherever. So as much as they made an effort, so the Aurovillians, they would get like on darshan days and all, they would get all cleaned up and ready, and they would put a nice clean lungi on, because they were going to ashram to samadhi. But still, however much they tried to clean their feet, they would still have those red feet. So then I came walking up to Auroville. So, and we're going to be meeting soon in that story, because B and I go way back to that time. So I one day decided that I was going to come to the ultimate goal, which was Auroville for me. I mean, it was clear, even though I loved the ashram, but and I didn't see so much difference, but they used to say Auroville. So I actually walked. And what I do remember very clearly is in 74, if I'm right, I'm not sure, but I believe the monsoon didn't come. So it was November, it should have been rain time, but it was absolutely divine. So I came up some shortcut road, and then the sky and earth were the same color. It was like evening time. And it's interesting because there's the flower of Auroville, the hibiscus, that has this very specific color of that orange glow, like gold orange. So the sky, and also the supramental color, you could say. So sky and earth, there was no difference. It was one huge plateau. So there was this incredible divine light, and at the same time there was this feeling of like, I've come to Mars. It was like being on Mars, you would just sort of come here, and then nobody was there. I believe it was maybe a Sunday afternoon, I don't know. And suddenly I came to a place, and then I saw a village guy going on the bicycle. I'm saying, Auroville, and then, like that. They would say, go that way, go that way. I'm saying, where am I going? There's nothing here. You walk for 1 kilometer, there's nothing. You 2 kilometer, 3 kilometer, and there's nothing. Just this huge plateau of red earth. And it was a dry year, obviously, but some canyons here and there, but nothing much of greenery. And then finally, from a distance, I see something that looked, for me in those days, it looked like a kind of ship that was being built, Matrimandiya. It was just the shattering of this. In a distance, in that glow, you would see this. And they had only done the 4 pillars. So the 4 pillars of Matrimandiya were there, only that part. But still, the shattering was there. So I figured this must be Auroville. I mean, and I had no idea, by the way. I thought the whole city was built, huh? I mean, I thought the city of the future was there, So, and I remember coming up and then realizing as I was going up, there was something in me saying, oh God, this is even better than I thought. It's not done. The city is not there. There's nothing here, So I go and take the road to Matrimandiya, and then I arrived in Matrimandiya camp, and at that time there were very few people in Auroville. But you will find that a little funny because I met who I realized later was Gaëtan, so a little French guy comes out after some time, and then I look at the architecture, and this is very interesting. The architecture already at that time struck me as unique. It's not that I had seen that much of the world, but I had seen enough to understand that what I was seeing, these keet is the leaf, the coconut leaf roofs, and the bamboo, there was something almost modern about it because it was done, they don't do it anymore much. It was a beautiful diamond geodesic kind of, not geodesic, but there were geodesic domes also, but there was something about the architecture, the way these Auroville pebbles were set, and a little chair. Somehow there was a very strong feeling of beauty. Beauty was very strong, that element, but it was still very simple, very basic. And then this guy comes to me and he says, hello, what do you want? So same thing, I'm like, I've come, like, I'm here to be in Auroville. So why I'm telling that story is that the new people today, and very often over the years, we say that actually, there's no place in Auroville, or it's not enough housing, it's difficult, etc. And I always say to people, listen, I know the story from the start. There were 200 people here, and this guy looked at me and I said, I want to stay here. And he said, oh, this is not that simple, huh? I mean, not everybody can just come here and stay, huh? And all that stuff. So this was Gaëtan. And he said to me, maybe you go to some guest house. There is one place down about 5 kilometers this side and all that. So I thought, you little bugger. So I walked my way back to a guest house and all that. And then I actually decided after a few days that I had seen a tree house near to where I live now, where that corner is with the Nandanam School corner. There was a tree house that had been abandoned. You remember that one? It was in the palmyra trees. And actually, I noticed 2-3 times walking by that nobody lived there. So I made my home there. But in the night, so I climbed up the trees. There was still a ladder available, and there was this platform up in the trees, very near Matrimandiya. So I stayed there. But the thing is that as much as I had faith and I was a courageous person in my travel, it was a very creepy feeling at night, because these palmyra leaves here, if you know them, they have a very particular sound. And then you have those owls, those screech owls. And I was like sitting there, and there was like a feeling of like, this is like not cool, like this place is like pretty bad. So actually, later on, in fact, I found out that the original Gurkha watchmen and all the villagers never passed that particular corner. They were so afraid that they would take a huge detour not to come at night to that exact corner where that second banyan is. So I took the few little things that I had, and I walked down and I went to sleep in the amphitheater. So that was at the Matrimandiya Amphitheater. And actually I made my home for a few nights there. So I would be all alone in that place, and I was like, I don't know what this guy is talking about. There's no place, there's place everywhere, there's lots of place. And then, long story, bakery, because that's the first thing that you do often when you come to a community, and everywhere you go, people are saying, oh, can I do something? And they say, no, we don't really need. Then the guy looks at you and then he says, Thomas and, not Thomas, Chris. And Thomas, both of them. And then they look at you, no, we don't really have any work. Please come. You ask for work because people said, and there was no organization. I mean, it just seemed like so disorganized, but then why would it be organized? I mean, you're in the middle of a desert. So what is very important in that story is that the beginning of Auroville, it is true in a way. Now it makes me smile when people say, oh, he's an original pioneer, but we were pioneers in a certain way. And believe me, it was no different than the far west. And I often tell people, it's a funny analogy. I was saying this was a spiritual far west. There was a connection to the deeper side of things, but people did what they felt was right, and so that's how Auroville was built. People would just come, and then you'd see from a distance like some windmill going up in the distance, and you'd like go on. We could see the sea from everywhere, and you would sit and say, what's that? Sit with some friends. I'm talking a little later on, of course. I can't, be so much in the exact development of how it came in. You'd see a tower going up somewhere in the distance, and you'd be sitting there with your friends and say, the fuck? What is that? And you'd say, I don't know, man. What is that? And you'd say, listen, tomorrow we'll go for a walk, and we're going to find out what's going on over there. And then, sometimes it would take 3 days, 4 days, and say, okay, today let's go and see, because look, there's a windmill. There's a windmill. Somebody's put up a windmill, in that thing. Come on, we have to go. And then all the way there, you'd be already in that mood. You'd say, who is that, you think, and all that. And then you'd reach there, and then you'd meet a bunch of German guys, or a bunch of French guys, or people from anywhere in the world, whatever. And you'd meet them, and suddenly you'd say, oh, they were like-minded people, nice, good people. You say, how did you come here? No, well, we've come to build Auroville. So Auroville was very much built from these kind of little settlements, right and left, and people each one had their own idea of what Auroville should be, and created their dream, And where we come together in that story is that after working in the bakery for some time, the reason why they gave me the job at the bakery, I still remember these guys. No, we don't need anybody. It's okay. No, the Aurovillians, they always have a foot on the brake and a foot on the gas. Till today, it's the same thing, It's like on the gas, on the brake, on the gas, on the brake. Yeah, oh, great, yeah, come. But wait, yeah, okay, you come next week or whatever. So that's my impression sometimes. We're just all a bit like that. So the reason why I got the job at the bakery is that they said, wait a minute, come here. Are you ready to come here at 3:30 in the morning and sift the flour? I said, yeah, sure, I'll come. So every day at that time, I had a place near there. I used to walk in the middle of the night at 3:30 in the morning through these groves, and then there was one place where they always said, don't ever walk there, because there was this old lady sitting there, this Mariamma, and she used to sit there, and people said she's a witch, and if she gets all the local village people used to say, if she gets a piece of your hair, you're finished, she'll put a curse on you. So through the tamarind tops. Now it's all village, but in those days it was just tamarind tops, so every night I used to walk, look at that lady, and then after a while kind of got to know, vanakkam eppadi irukkranga, okay, vanakkam eppadi enga pora, so the whole thing was there. And then from the bakery at some point, after some time, I became in charge of the famous Auroville biscuits. I was in Thomas left us, and then he gave us he gave me the job of making those biscuits. And at that time I used to cycle with Thomas. Thomas was this strong German fellow. He's still around, He must be 80 by now. Strong German guy, and I was this thin little fellow and all that. And even, not only was I that so thin that I remember going to the health clinic here, and what was her name at that time? It was some doctor. She went to see the people I was living with, and she said, listen, you have to do something with this guy. I mean, this is getting dangerous, this thin little guy and all. And then we used to go cycling to Pondy to deliver the biscuits to the little shops everywhere. So that was quite a job, you would have these old bicycles, and you'd cycle down to Pondy and come back, and you'd do that 3, 4, 5 times a week. And in those days, there was only water, and no food. No food. And when I'm telling you no food, I'm not exaggerating. We had a place called Potus for All, and at that time, Claire was running that thing. And you would go to Claire, and you would say, listen, I heard that you can get papaya. And she would say, sure, nice young guy. Then, sure, we'll put you on the list for a papaya. And then you'd wait 3 weeks to get a papaya, So what happened is not only was I very thin, but we were so hungry that we started eating, raw bread, and then we started, because there was really nothing. And so we had to slowly, really start doing our own agriculture and all of them. But it started very rough, very, very tough. And so where we meet is that at some point I was in this area called Aspiration at the bakery, and then suddenly I started discovering the Matrimandiya. And I still remember this caravan came with all these Frenchies from France had come. Remember that second bunch? And they all came, and then these guys were all French people from Paris who had actually come also with an incredible ideal of what could Auroville be, and fantastic, we're going to do like the city of the future, etc. And they landed up in our second caravan, and then after 2-3 days, these guys were there, and they were like, "Mais qu'est-ce qu'on fait là?" Like, what are we doing here? So, being French, they made a restaurant. They made a little restaurant, and I remember I was like appalled at the thought of these guys. Some of them, of course, but still, making a little restaurant there. You see, today it's only restaurants, but at that time was like, and I said, how sad, people come here and they want to, the pleasures of life, of eating food and hanging out and drinking some Coca-Cola and playing cards or chess and all that. And so it was not really representing the majority of people, but still. So I remember telling some of these French guys one day, I went to the nursery and I met Narad, the famous Narad. He was, he's still around also, and then he was doing this wonderful nursery. And Narad told me, well, if you want to come and work in the nursery, you're welcome. So I remember not being able to resist going back to that, some of those Frenchies and saying, I'm moving to center. Matrimandiya, that area. And then they would look at me and they would say, yeah, and so what? Well, I'd said, you know what it's like. Like center, and then they would say, yes. So, but I said, well, you know that the vibration is different over there, No, terrible. And so I made my way to center, and then I started working in the nursery. And when I came to the nursery, was this very nice American guy called B. And here's B. And I will let B tell you a little bit more about what it was like in the nursery in those days. And I do remember especially the time, since there was so little, how we used to just enjoy having a little fruit together.
We had a kind of a spirit, We could do things together. We could work together. Narad played a little bit the big boss at that time, so we were kind of aligned against him a bit at certain points. But he was really sincere, and he tried his best, and we were able to get that nursery together. But what happened was, the emphasis was on the Matrimandiya, on the construction. Because at that time the ground was so hard that you had to dig a 1 meter pit, 1 meter square, cubic meter, and mix that topsoil with some compost, otherwise the tree wouldn't grow. So we did that, and we used to compete how fast either one of us could make the pit compared to the other one. But the fastest you could dig one of those pits was about an hour and a half. The other thing that happened is that the trees that we were growing in the nursery, we started to send out all over Auroville. So we got into a policy where we're going to grow a couple million trees and green this whole plateau. So the Matrimandiya nursery really took on another high production capacity story. And then we went and got seeds from all over the world. At that time, you could bring seeds in from anywhere. Now you can't do that, but at that time we had these exchanges with all the botanical gardens around the world. So we brought in, an enormous amount of trees, and we also went to Bangalore to the big botanical garden there. Narad knew the guys there, and the seasons when the trees would be seeding, we got all those seeds. So we really worked at producing trees. And you see them all over now. But it was quite an operation. Yeah, really disciplined, and we got our food scene together. We had a little kitchen in the nursery itself, and then we went up to what was called center kitchen, and everybody took one turn per day cooking and one day cleaning. That was the routine. And if you wouldn't cook one day and wouldn't clean one day, we threw the people out of the kitchen, and they had to go on their own. So that was
Pretty straightforward.
it was pretty straightforward. But there was not much music. You were not. How did you make the switch to music? Because we didn't do. There was only Alan. We had an eccentric American guy there, who was a guitar player, and he started playing about 5:30 in the morning, and he knew one classical Spanish piece, and he played that over and over again every morning. It was really amazing.
He was high-strung, and he
was
just
totally wacko.
He used to drink like 20 cups of coffee a day, and he was into this extreme discipline. So he did hatha yoga, he did exercise, he woke up at even earlier than 5:30, if I remember well. And he didn't like to sleep much at night, so he was highly strung. He was like, and I remember when this guy used to take he was, and then I remember when he used to take a crowbar, because that was, see, this is the language of the days, Alavanga, Mamti, and that was and Chetty. So basically, the Alavanga is the crowbar to dig the earth. The Mamti, it's still around, but what I'm saying is this was our life. That's all we really. And it's not a joke when I tell you that, like, you could actually sort of think, oh, one day I'm going to get a really good Mamti like this guy has. Like I'm going to go myself to the village and I'm going to get myself a really good one. And then, the main thing that I would emphasize was that connection also to the local people was very strong, in the sense that, we would really learn a lot from the local people, actually. Still today, for me, at least I feel it that way, but it was a really big deal, So, for example, a local person would look at your crowbar, and then he would say, you have to get, this is not how, there's a guy like, 30 kilometers away that actually does these things the right way, and he'll make it beautiful and all that. So you would so our lives were pretty simple, and you would go to bed at night and you'd be dreaming about your Alavanga for the next 4 days, and how maybe one day you'll actually go 30 kilometers, take a bus and get a guy to make your Alavanga so you could come back and actually dig holes better than everyone else. And one thing that you did, which was unique, is that you did the first ferro cement roof, I remember.
Yeah.
And it's still up there somehow.
It's still there, and it still doesn't leak.
It looked like an old blanket.
Yeah.
It looked like as if somebody threw a blanket or something. Everybody laughed at him. They said that will never work and all that. But anyway.
That's right. Francis came to watch it fall down. He wouldn't help us with the work. He sat there and he said, "No, I'm not going to help you because that thing's going to fall down, and I want to see it fall down." And it's still there. They use it as a storeroom now, but that was my first house that I built. I've stayed first in Janet's house. Janet built a house there. Janet, who recently passed away, she built a house there she called Joy, and she moved over to where this Joy guest house is now called Serendipity, and moved over there. So her old house was there, and that's where I moved in. And it was falling down, so then I rebuilt it. Shyam Sundar gave me 1,000 rupees to build the house.
Wow, a lot of money, yeah?
Yeah, it was fantastic. And it's still there.
They made me go back and forth also from Pondy to Auroville because at some point, when I was in the bakery, somebody said to me, you at that time I was Commonwealth, so it was Commonwealth Canadian, so you didn't need a visa, but nothing has changed much in that way. Somebody would tell you, you have to register to be an Aurovillian. And then, of course, the one guy would tell you that, and next day would be one guy say, bullshit, you have to register for an Aurovillian. You are an Aurovillian, you be an Aurovillian, it's fine and all that. But then somebody else would say, no, you have to do it, you have to do it, you have to. And so I went to, at some point I said, listen, and somebody said, listen, you won't lose anything by going there and becoming an Aurovillian or whatever. So I remember cycling over to Shamsundar, who was one of the people in charge of Auroville, and that's where I understood the politics of Auroville, because I asked Shamsundar, I said, excuse me, he sat behind his desk, he would sit, Marwari fellow, but he was a different kind, a very thin fellow, and he looked at me and he went, what can I do for you? And I said, well, I was told that I would become an Aurovillian and all that, and he said, I suggest that you go and see one Mr. Navajata in Pondicherry. I thought it's strange, he told me to come and see him. So I went all the way to Pondi, and then I went to see Navajata, who was the, you could say, president or chairman of the Aurobindo Society. Wow, what a contrast. This guy was sitting on these, next to the ashram building there, on these, red satin cushions, and all these women used to come and bow at him and kiss his feet, and I don't know what, and he was sitting there, very... And I said, excuse me, I was told that I should come here to meet you to know whether I could become an Aurovillian. And the guy looked at me and said, who told you this? And then he looks at me and he says, I suggest you go and see one Mr. Shamsundar in Auroville. So then I understood. And then people say, these two guys, their mother has put both of them in charge. So they don't get along at all. So that was the story of how difficult it was. And then, of course, you would understand that there's no point, just be, you're an Aurovillian. I mean, to tell you the truth, I still believe in that, actually much more. I know that there has to be a system, and I understand that there is a system, but the truth of the matter is this exercise should be simplified, really, because it was so easy. I remember being in the co-op, so I was the first liaison officer for the government with OJA.
Yeah.
And we had a co-op going. This is much later. Years later, I must have been about 22.
But let me just tell you my Shamsundar story. Because they told me, you have to see Shamsundar to join Auroville. So I went into office, and somebody brought me, and they said that this guy wants to join Auroville. And he was writing a letter, and his handwriting was about this high. And he didn't stop. He just kept writing his letter, and I'm standing there, and it seemed like a couple minutes went by. And then he looks up at me and he says, oh, welcome to Auroville. We are happy you have come. That was it. That was the entry process. He didn't send me to Navajata or anything, but he told this woman who brought me in, now don't overwork him. Don't make him work too much.
Funny.
So that was really nice. That was a fantastic entry process.
So it was like that, and then years later, I remember being in this cooperative. We called it the Cooperative. I quite liked the name instead of Executive Council and whatever else they call it these days. And because, but they wanted to change it from cooperative because it sounds too much like milk distribution, And I said, well, cooperative sounds nicer. But how many Aurovillians passed through us in those days? And I still remember, Pierre and many people, Pierre Fouladu. And people used to come to our committee and say, excuse me, same story. I heard that we have to see you to become Aurovillian. And of course, being who I am, I used to say, you're Aurovillian, it's fine. Let's see, just live your life and let's see what happens. Looks great. So back to the music.
But one other quick story. Well, it wasn't the entry service or anything, but people would come. This one woman came, she was a French woman, and she said, I have come to Auroville to remove the falsehood that has fallen over the whole community. Went like that. And we all, kind of went back in our chair. We said, okay, she's still here.
Does she have a name?
She's still doing it, yes, but I'll tell you later.
I know who it is, it's okay. So anyway. Yeah, so this was, and then it's alive. So people are saying, oh, you did so many things in Auroville, so environment, and the reinvention of I often said to people that Auroville for me was reinventing the wheel. You know that expression, you don't reinvent the wheel. Since you're a kid, you say you can't reinvent the wheel. And I actually realized that Auroville was the opposite of that. So a small example of that was we had engineers here. We had Piero, who was a very high-level engineer, working on the plans of Matrimandiya and Bharat, Nivas and stuff. But by that time, when I moved away from Matrimandiya, we started building things like he was doing his ferro cement. I remember doing a mud house, and I remember putting bricks of mud, not bricks, mud, just straight mud, building it yourself. And then, first rain, it would wash out and say, okay, well, that doesn't work. And then at some point you say, hey, maybe if I dig a little bit before I put the earth. And then you do that, and then it would wash away. And I remember in Oro Dam, I was the first to actually, I had this idea. I said, you know what? I have a great idea. I'm going to take a wood, 4 pieces of wood, and hammer them together, and that will be a frame to make some kind of a block made of earth. Genius. And then, I started making those blocks, and you would just throw the earth inside and all that. All this stuff existed since, thousands of years, but actually you were discovering it yourself. And perhaps, in a way, I would say that this is a part of Auroville which we have to really go back to that in a different kind of way. But what I mean, stop constantly living on preconceived models. Even in building, I've had the pleasure recently of going back to building and, being inventive, being creative. It feels like we've lost a bit of that. And there's too much, I feel, that kind of thing that stops you, why couldn't you have a beautiful hut in the middle of Auroville, or all sorts of, all types of architectures, but the inventive part, the part where you actually give yourself to new ideas, and of course take from all the experience of others, but not be so stuck on, it's got to be this way, and now the time is over for this, now it's only flats, or etc. It's something that I'm expressing because it does disturb me a little bit sometimes that we have lost a little bit in that experimental thing. People still do it actually, but what I mean is in the main trend of Auroville, it has become a little bit looked down upon. Oh, we've seen that, we've seen huts, we've seen, but I feel that we have to start giving more importance to some of these original techniques and things that we discovered in those days.
So how did all the working aspects of creating a livable space, if you will, or tie in with the mystic goals or the spiritual goals of the people who came here to build this city?
Yeah.
What was the connection that really kept that?
So interestingly enough, and that's why also it's a little disturbing sometimes when people actually tell you, well, what is spiritual about it? But actually the fact is that it was very intense. There was a real, even though we speak of no religion, and obviously we were never here to create a religion, but there was religious fervor. People were very, very serious and intense, very intense. It was not always fun, actually. People were crazy intense about what is the yoga and the right and the wrong. And of course, we suffered a lot in the beginning from, oh my God, Mother said. I tell you, when I came to Auroville, Mother said was like, I'm not exaggerating if I tell you 200 times a day. Somebody would, Mother said, and don't forget Mother said, for anything. Somebody would say, I think I'd like to cut the grass in front of the house. It'd be nice. And Mother said, don't cut the grass. People would invent also. And then people, I still remember an experience where people started taking quotes from Savitri, and the first bulletin board, now that was all hell broke loose with the first bulletin board at Unity, not Pavilion Unit, Unity Kitchen, the community kitchen. So they set up a bulletin board. Oh, that was a new era of Auroville, the bulletin board. So then that was a place where people incognito could put something up, So suddenly somebody would take a quote from Aurobindo and he would put it on, and then somebody would read it, and then he would go straight to that guy. You put that quote on there. I could see it. I know that it's you. And, so there would be all these kind of funny things. But aside from that, there was a real sense that people had come here to create something completely different, as I hope it still is today. So there was a very strong spiritual inclination. It was very intense. It was the times before, way before internet. This is the sound of Auroville, by the way, this bird. This is really the quail, and then this is either the quail or there's the other one which is the quail, and there's the other one which is the...
Brain fever?
So, and I think that it was just the intensity, and at that time, that is also an interesting thing. So people fly in now, fly out. It's a normal thing, nothing wrong with it. In those days, if you would even mention the idea that you were thinking of going out of Auroville, people would look at you like it was a bad thing. Oh, you don't know what you want. And so it had that kind of so people joke about it and say, was it a sect? Well, it wasn't a sect, but it wasn't far from it in many ways, right? Let's face it. I mean, it was not bad. It doesn't have to be. And I love the way that in India, so you'd go, especially France, or you'd go to America, all over the world, and say, is it a sect? Is it a sect that you live in? You're actually in India somewhere, and I remember being in Chennai and somebody said, oh, is it a sect? Very nice, good. So it was that's when you would see the completely different approach to the thing. So at the risk of rapping too much, I will play you a little something. I really don't know exactly what to play, but I think...
No, but tell them how you evolved this instrument.
Yes, I did meet her some years later, and especially one guy, her assistant called Shankara Menon, who I'd met a few times. So this, so what happened is that actually there is a very interesting aspect to the life in Auroville, is that, just to give you an idea of the intensity, is that actually people would say that, Mother had said, of course, that, it was not the time for artists, which was a bit strange. It was highly exaggerated in the way that it was said, but, these rough and tough, like as I said, Far West types, we had really tough people here, big muscle guys and all that. And in the early beginning, if somebody would play a little guitar, it would be okay, but if somebody would say that he wants to explore deeper into the, this is what, no, there's no place for that. So it was really not welcome for a long time. It was a nice thing that you knew how to play guitar, but it was not like something that you would do, this is you work, that's it.
Yeah,
and you do the yoga.
In your free time.
In your free time, yeah. And even then, and you do the yoga. This is typical Auroville, so you do the yoga. You see, I like this guy, but he's not doing the yoga or whatever, and it's like, yeah, and, there was this thing, do the yoga, and we believed it, I remember feeling sometimes all these impressions that I wasn't working enough, for example. You'd be working like 12 hours a day and you would still say, no, it's not enough. So we worked really hard. And to go back to this, so what happened is that then things started relaxing a little bit. And then when I was in those times in Aurodam there, and we started growing our own food, and we had our own fields, we had our own peanuts, and then we had this thing of going back to the land. In fact, that's when you came to get me to finish one of the ramp pieces. You came to Aurodam and you said, listen, there's still one piece that's like, or two pieces, because he took over the work, and I dropped it like that, because suddenly my life had changed, back to the land. And there is an interesting thing also to mention, is that all these different phases that you go through. I remember very, very distinctly sitting under the banyan tree at a meditation, and it was a transition phase for me, and I felt discouraged a little bit, and I thought, why everybody's pretending? Like, why are they so spiritual? Why why are they, I see the same person who's being so spiritual doing something so nasty or weird the next day, etc. And these kind of things. And I was still young, I was 20, So suddenly I found people of my age, because when I came to Auroville, I was 16. Next down the line was 10 years old, and then everybody else was 22, 23. So I was the only person of my age, which was great because I had incredible mentors, people who really taught me a lot, one after the other. But then at some point I started meeting people who were my age, and then we started Aurodam, and this was a full-on back to the land. We weren't interested in anything else but mud housing, peat work, and then I met these older green belters, we called the green belters, and there was already a very distinct thing between the green belters and the city people. We already had and the green belters were these guys, they were like maybe 30 years old, 35, 40 at the most, and they looked like they were 80 years old, with long hair, the big beards, and suddenly you'd meet these kind of people and you were impressed because they were working the land, they were plowing their own fields, they were having their own bullock carts and all that. So I went into this whole phase. But then why I'm telling you all this is that suddenly I rediscovered a little bit of music, and gradually I started meeting people that were playing, and then I picked up the guitar again. So aside from the more kind of typical things that you play by the campfire, which I really don't know much about, I started improvising, and then I had an incredible... So what happened is that I actually had a great love for the music that I heard around me in the village. So people used to go crazy with this, they used to say, it was a natural thing. People would hear this blaring speakers right and left from Aryan Chavadi. For me, it was part of life. I had no problem with it. So for years, I was exposed to this cinema music from the Tamil Nadu stuff and all that. So I actually enjoyed that a lot. So whenever I would pick up a guitar, I would, of course, this is more classical sounding, but they would have all these songs. So that there would be all this kind of jolly stuff going on, and I would enjoy that, and I would transcribe some of this onto the guitar. And what happened is that I started Mridangam. So Mridangam is many of you know it. Those who don't, it is like the tabla, but in two sides you have it is a pakawaj, you could say also, but it is a drum that has two sides, and it's ancient, absolutely ancient. And I decided that I was going to learn the Mridangam. And at that time, everything Indian was just the best in the world. Like I would go off to Madurai. I was 21, 22 years old. I would just go off in my white lungi, and then, I met, Minakshi told me, if you go to the temple in Minakshi temple, and just make them understand that you know what you're up to, because she said they don't allow Westerners. So I would just knew that all I had to say, Yenike Teriyam, means I know. And then, that was the magic phrase. So I would walk into these temples, and I would come with my lungi, white guy and all that, hair down to here, and whatever. And I would and I was just absolutely passionate about everything Indian, the culture, the Tamil language. You could never be Tamil enough, right? You're a white guy. But so I learned the ways of the land in that way, and then same thing with the agriculture, with everything. And passion for everything Indian. So the music was part of it. And since I had been an okay musician as a young guy, I suddenly realized that this is the music that I loved. In fact, I knew that even before coming to India, because every time, as much as I love progressive rock, I'm from the progressive rock age, the Jethro Tulls, the Pink Floyds, all this was really my culture. But I remember, contrary to a lot of friends that I had, every time I would hear Indian music, I would go, ooh, what's that? Something's happening here in my heart. Something's here. Really, I could really feel it, especially the vocal. I said, oh my God, what is going on here? This is special. So I went back to that story. So the Mridangam was an interesting thing, because I would strap this big drum onto my bicycle, cycle down to Pondi, and then I would meet one guy called K.M. Vaidyanathan. Should I tell that about K.M. Vaidyanathan? K.M. Vaidyanathan. So Mr. K.M. Vaidyanathan was my first introduction to classical Carnatic music with my drums. So I would go there and then I'd sit and meet him and I said, "Excuse me, I would like to learn with you. Is it possible?" And this fellow was sitting there tumbling. Okay. What do you want to learn? So this guy used to chew this pan, and he was dripping with pan and all that. There's monthly you give 20 rupees. Monthly 20 rupees. So I'm like looking at this guy and I'm like disappointed, I'm hurt. Oh my God, he wants money. I was an Auroville and we didn't have money. Money was like dirty stuff. I mean, we didn't deal with money in those days. We never saw money. I was like, oh my God, he wants money. How? And then the guy looked at me, it's typical guy, he looked at me. I said, but for music, you should give freely. And he looked at me, that is not good. No. That is not good. So the guy looks at me like, okay. So I said, okay, I'll get the money together. So basically I come back to Auroville. He said, I come next week, Friday. Friday afternoon you come. So I get my thing. So every time it's a big deal. You tie your mridangam on the bicycle, you go down to Pondi, come to this guy, then I have managed to find enough money, right and left here and there, like to have my 20 rupees to give him for the first class. So I got the money. Here it is. Good. Did you bring the items? Did you bring the items? Okay, what items? Then he said, speak to my wife. So I go, his wife says, hey. No, she's not like that. So she's like, no, we will require the puja items. Puja items, yeah. So you will get one coconut, this banana. I'll give you the list, she says. So there has to be a puja before you start. So I said, okay, I'll get them. And then I go to him and says, I'll go to the market now and get this stuff next week. So this is like 3 weeks. And I'm like, and I have my mridangam at home and I'm banging like some bongo and stuff. And of course all the other guys are saying, what the hell is this guy doing? Like, come on, get real, man. Like, you play guitar, like sing some Bob Dylan or something. I mean, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, listen, I mean, it's the most beautiful thing, this drum, you'll see, So next week I go, and then finally I have all my puja items, everything ready. This guy sits down, and he says, okay, you sit. They make the puja, it takes about 10 minutes, everything is fine. And then he goes like this, now you do ta, ka, di, mi, tam. So I like, okay, ta, ka, di, mi, tam. Repeat after me. Ta, ka, di, mi, tum. Something like that. And then he looks at me, very good, very good. Next lesson. So I was like that, it was going on and on. So this guy, obviously I realized he didn't want to teach me much at all. Like he was like really dragging me. But I went on for months and months anyway, started learning. And then every time I would ask him a question, I said, sir, there is one thing. At the end of all this Carnatic music, there is some pattern, no? I don't know, I said it's like a 3 something. So instead of just telling me like they would tell you in a normal thing, this is called T-high, or it's called Koravai. It's a pattern of 3 repeated, or a pattern of 5 repeated 3 times or whatever. He said, don't ask this, we will see later. So this goes on and on. So finally I dropped the damn thing. I decided that I'm not going to play mridangam. And why I'm telling you this, connection to music, then years pass by and I'm playing and playing and playing. And it's a long story. I can tell you one thing, that I stood with the tampura. You know what the tampura is? It is just a 4-string drawn instrument. Years on end singing Om and discovering sounds, and it was just like, I had a passion, so it became like music. And then I started playing veena. So the South Indian veena, and then the whole technique of the veena, and then I had another teacher later on, then sarod, and went on and on. So Indian music became very, very important for me. And so what happened is that finally, well, it's a little long to tell here, but there was a. Are you okay with time? Is that getting long? It's okay. We'll.
We have to ask the people. Are you ready to keep going?
We are ready. Poor Bharat Nivas organizers.
No, not. I won't make it too long. Yes. So that story. So basically, this Sufi master came. So he wasn't. He didn't say he was a Sufi master. He was a great santoor player from Iran, who living in Germany. And he came to Auroville, and then after some time I was so impressed by them. I let them stay in my house. They were the first incredible musicians. This guy was playing in the symphonic orchestra percussion, but he was on the side going on with this Iranian santoor. So he taught me for months and months and months, very basics of music. And then at some point he told me, so I had gone in between back to Canada once after 7 years. First 7 years I didn't move. 7 years I was in Auroville. Then I actually ended up in Canada for a moment. And then while in Canada, I discovered, guitar, this, that. So I brought myself, I worked my ass off to get, myself a good guitar, and brought a nice guitar bag, fancy thing and all that. That was the only thing I had. I brought back this wonderful guitar, which was like a gem. So this fellow, this Iranian fellow, who was really into classical Indian music and Iranian music, etc., he said, do you play guitar? So I said, yeah, I play guitar and all that. And he said, bring your instrument. He used to talk like, you bring this instrument, it's nice. So I bring him the guitar, and then I show him my beautiful $1,000 guitar, man, like a ovation and all that. And I play some stuff and all that. And he looks at me and he says, it's very nice, very, very nice. Good toy for you. And I'm like, I'm a young guy, I'm still young, and he's much older to me, and I feel like hurt, so hurt, And he says, if you want to learn real music, this is a toy. This is not the instrument. So I said, okay, so I'll learn with you. So how do I learn your real music? This guy had a huge effect on me. This was day and night we were together. And so he said, he started teaching me on a wooden table all the rhythms, how to keep rhythm, how to find space, etc. So I went on and on and on learning with him, and there was some vocal, there was all sorts of aspects of music, but it was music from the deeper point of view, from the very spiritual point of view. He was very deep. He used to sit sometimes and play his santoor for 6-7 hours without stopping. Everybody dropped away from him, but I stayed. So he took me on as his shishya, I was his favorite fellow. He said, Nadaka, he will sit with me, no problem, and all that. And so I learned a lot from him. And then one day before, he spent about 4 or 5 months here, and before he had to go back to Europe, he came to me one day, and then somebody told me, that somebody offered him to play a concert here in Auroville. And I said, that's what happened. He's a different guy. He's a little bit more kind of organized suddenly, less of that, we don't do this, we don't do that. And suddenly, and he came to my little hut in the morning. His name was Nemat. He came to my little hut. That's after 4 months of suffering, literally, learning but suffering. This guy put me through torture musically. So I come there, and then he says, here, I write one music for you, for me and you to play together. So I said, okay, and he had written notes. I remember the tune. It was, I can't play it now. Very Iranian. La 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 la. And santoor, and so I look at him and I say, but how shall I play this, And he looks at me and he says, you play guitar, no? And I said, but you told me the guitar is nonsense, rubbish. Guitar and santur together is fantastic. So you see, it was all a game, it was all a kind of learning to deconstruct and reconstruct. So after that, I became more of a fusion artist. I started playing, and I had my first concert in Chennai at IIT, organized by the German consulate. And then I played for the first time. I made music for a film called Krog Boy about the local nature and everything, a feature film for children. So I played with the famous Vikku Vinayakaram, actually, for that film. And then he proposed that I told him I'm having a concert in Chennai. He said, can I play with you? So I said, oh my God, he's going to play with me. So I played in Chennai. So we had our first concert, and I finished the last notes of the concert we're playing, and everybody like a guitar, and then finish. This guy runs onto the stage, grabs me like this, takes the microphone, and this was my mridangam guy from Pondicherry, and he started screaming, my student, this is my student, this is my shisha, yeah, fantastic, fantastic. So basically, it was embarrassing. So and then later on I started playing with, I met Ganesh Kumaresh, who were two young violin virtuosos, and then we started playing together, and this is just the history of my life, half in Auroville, half in Chennai. That means I used to spend in Mylapore with them tons of times, and it was interesting because they were interested in, of course, the whole fusion aspect, but I was very interested in the classical music, and that's where also I got to learn a lot of the Indian stuff. I'll just play a little something, I hope I can, that comes from those times. Just it'll be nice to have a little music. So I'll put a rhythm for that, if you don't mind. And the rhythm which I'm going to put, by the way, is mridangam, so it's funny. So this was from my first album, so this was really the beginning of a new life for me, like suddenly, that was 1990. particular here is that you have. So you have. You have these very particular fretted things. So what happened is that during this time, the late 80s, I had the wonderful opportunity of going regularly down south, as I told you, and I used to stay in all these different temples and things, and I discovered a wonderful gentleman called Ramji, who was one of the greatest veena makers in South India. And we became friends. I mean, he became friends. He was like a guru to me. He was like a teacher, but it was more of a friendship. He was about 85 years old and I was 25 or whatever. And he told me a story about how they used the veena. He said, when I was young in the 1900s, he said, the women used to play veena. They used to put their veenas in the sun so that the wax of the fretboard would melt. The veena is the original South Indian string instrument, and it has a fretboard made of very hard wax, like sealing wax. And so he used to say that they used to put their veenas in the sun so that they could adjust the frets according to the raga that they were going to play, or the ragas they were going to play for the next days. So I became fascinated. So I came back to Auroville, and then my thought was, okay, if that can be done, then I'm going to make something similar, but why wax this and that? I'll make a guitar that has mobile frets. So this guitar has actually this ability to move the frets to different positions, which is very important because for Indian music there can be notes, especially sometimes the very minor notes. So this is veena techniques. And then the other thing that I had learned from the veena is, because I played veena for quite some time, was the technique of having those little strings, chikari string. So this is what you call the talam strings. So they actually determine the beat that you're playing. So all these are things that are integrated into this instrument slowly over the years. So for example, if you do the talam string, so these are all like veena techniques that are kind of integrated into the guitar. So, Hamsadwani would be a typical one on raga that doesn't. And then it still is a guitar at the same time, so that's why it was modified in a way that, so you have the very Indian thing. Or you can go even deeper into the more North Indian styles where you... the guitar aspect, that comes in, or like. So, for example, you have a raga called Hemavati. So I studied ragas and studied and studied and studied. I spent my life on kind of like going from the vocal to the guitar, etc. And Hemavati goes like this, for example. It's one of my favorite ragas. It's very South Indian. So the fret movement, you see, so I have to move the fret because it's out. Typical South Indian. At the same time, it can have a little bit of a jazzy intonation. And from here you go from the raga, Hemavati, you go to Django Reinhardt. It has that kind of like it's a very hybrid instrument. So from the North Indian to the South Indian to the Western styles, it kind of has that flexibility, but it's over years and years of figuring out how to make this happen. And so gradual modifications of the instrument to come to this stage. So that was a little presentation of the instrument.
What's it called?
I just call it the raga guitar. You know what it's called actually? It's called the guitar. Geet is song, tar is string. And so for sure that works, singing string. So I like to mention that.
Can you explain the side strings?
So the side strings here, there's a tampura here. Not tuned, unfortunately. If I start tuning, it's going to take a long time. I was a little stuck and got a little late. So these are all. So this one, the guitar is amplified, so in this case, so you ask about the side strings. So I just make sure that the pickup, a little more volume. There is a problem with the technical thing. So these are sympathetic strings that are tuned according to the raga that I play, and there's a little tampura on top. And I do give demonstrations of that, but that would mean a very specific thing. And then a little bit in the spirit of Auroville, I will conclude a little bit with just a little something that I feel really fits somehow. Little volume. going to sing just a little bit on that because it's so beautiful, the Anandamai. Thank you so much. So to conclude, I think it's good. I think we can conclude. Thank you, B, for this.
It's not, it's Bharat, Nivas, and
Thank you so much for that.
Together.
Good. And you know, this is experimental in a certain way, so it's interesting. For me, I mean, it's interesting to share that it's actually, I suddenly realized that it's the disconnect of how difficult it is actually to be in a talking mode and then to get into the musical mode, because actually I'm used to a very focused thing when I do, let's say, a concert, and it's amazing because I'll come like 2 hours before, and again that's a kind of like sadhana in its own way, so you actually really focus, and then you come to that kind of state where everything is in tune and everything works, and then the other side is the one that is speaks and talks and all that, and of course they should be able to come together, but it's not that simple, I realized, to actually go from one to the other. So I hope that we will have more opportunities to do such beautiful things. And then I realized that, you know, the thing is that with storytelling, you could really, I mean, one could really write a book actually about this. I mean, it's a long story, so many facets, so many aspects to it. I'm glad that I could share that little bit with you, and I thank you for being here. All of you are good friends, and we're all connected in some way. So thank you for attending this, and thank you for organizing this.
My pleasure. It's us all together.
Okay.
So. Thank you so much, dear Nadaka and Bhumika. Wish you a very happy birthday. So for both of you, a small gift from Bharat Nivas.
Wow.
We hope you like it.
Nice. Thank you so much.